It's my privilege today to introduce to you Jan Edgar Langbein. For 28 years, Jan has been an activist in efforts to end violence against women. She is currently the CEO of the Genesis Women's Shelter and Support. Jan also has co-founded the annual International Conference on Crimes Against Women. And so, in keeping with the McCormick lecture spirit, I can't think of a more capable or deserved lecturer than is Jan Langbein. You know, through her work dealing with domestic violence, both through the Genesis Shelter and beyond, we know that Jan has made an impact not only on the greater Dallas area, but really on the entire nation. And really has impacted the global issues related to domestic violence. At the Genesis Women's Shelter and Support, there they provide shelter services and also daycare and on-site school and civil legal representation and job readiness programming, as well as advocacy and other kinds of counseling. I want to say that she comes here today as one who in 2009 was the senior policy advisor to the director of the United States Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women. She's been the recipient of numerous awards for her leadership in community service, including the FBI Director's Community Leadership Award, Mosaic Family Services Champion of Human Rights Award, Mary Harriman Community Leadership Award, and the list goes on and on. I'm going to read the other 2/3 of these in the next two opportunities I have to introduce her. But the point being, not only has she made a difference, but others throughout the country have recognized the difference that she makes. Now, I want to say that Jan is also notably a PK, which means preacher's kid. Her father, Pastor Edgar, was a pastor here in this conference for many years. Fred was pastor with Tom Shipp at Highland Park as an associate. And for 25 years, he was at Oaklawn. Many of you may know him from that particular day. This morning, Jan told us that on the Saturday that he died, he was to preach at Lover's Lane that Sunday morning. And of course, he was missed, not only that Sunday, but has been missed for years following. But what an impact he made. Now, I told Jan this. I had an associate in Tyler named Dow Harleston. And Dow was once Fred Edgar's associate. And I told Jan that everything I did was measured against Fred. She asked me if I lived up to it. I said, I doubt it. But Jan is one who comes with not only a knowledge of this subject that she'll address with us in these times that she'll be before us, but she comes to us as a strong United Methodist laywoman, a member of Highland Park United Methodist Church, and one who comes to us here today very much aware, keenly aware of the United Methodist Church and our mission and outreach throughout the world for many decades. So as we welcome Jan this morning, I want to ask us to do so in a true Lover's Lane United Methodist fashion. And Jan, welcome to this pulpit.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. That was a very nice introduction. Thank you. Well, just listening to that introduction, I'm just exhausted, right? No wonder I'm tired all the time. It is such an honor and a privilege for me to be invited to be part of this worship service today. Thank you, Dr. Copeland, for inviting me. I appreciate all the lay and staff who made this possible, and certainly the McCormicks who have underwritten this entire series. I remember the first time I ever stepped foot in Lover's Lane Methodist Church. It was the summer of my 4th grade year, and Daddy had been transferred down here from Connecticut to Highland Park, but we moved in next door to somebody whose name you'll probably remember, Jeanette Dilworth. Jeanette Dilworth, I see some nods and some smiles. She was a lifelong pillar of this community, and her daughter Ann and I would be driven up here on a regular basis once or twice every week while she fixed the flowers on the altar. She prepared food for someone or got ready for a committee. And I remember meeting Dr. Shipp. Oh my gosh, this big man, but this big man of Methodism. and I was introduced to this church that was really larger than life. You guys have been to Haiti, and you've been to Kenya, and you feed homeless and hopeless and the recently incarcerated at Christmas time. I remember thinking then, what can't you do? And I continue to be amazed about 60 years later at what this congregation accomplishes. Now, today we're going to keep going forward on that. We're going to have a conversation, a pretty strong conversation about an incident, an issue. We're going to talk with transparency and with honesty on how can we end the holy hush. How do we end the holy hush on domestic violence that plagues our community, that plagues our city? You know, regardless of your theology, regardless of your faith community, whether you believe in egalitarian relationships or complementarian relationships, you need to know that studies tell us that women of faith are less likely to tell that they're in an abusive relationship, and they're least likely to get out and address and get help from a secular organization like ours at Genesis. But why is that? Why do women not step forward and tell? Is it a misinterpretation of the scripture? Is it that Jesus suffered, so I need to suffer? Is it not an understanding, which I have to tell you is enforced by that abusive partner, but it's also often reinforced by the faith community in which it means so much to her. It may be clergy not knowing what to say, or not knowing how to say it, or not understanding it, and so we are silent. In Psalms we read, "It is not my enemy who reviles me, then I could bear it. It's not my adversary who deals insolently with me, then I could hide. It is you, my equal, my constant companion with whom I walk in God's house in fellowship." And so it was 2,000 years ago, and ladies and gentlemen, so it is today. Domestic violence is the leading cause of injury to women in the United States. According to the FBI, every 9 seconds a woman is assaulted. A mother, a sister, a coworker, a friend, by someone who says that he loves her, by someone who tells her it's her fault, and by someone who tries to tell the rest of us it's none of your business. This crime, most always perpetrated against women, impacts the lives of men as well. Because you men in this room are fathers, and you are sons, and you are brothers, and you are grandfathers. You are impacted, your lives are impacted because it impacts the lives of women in your life. Also, men certainly can be victims of this kind of violence, verbal and emotional and physical violence. But when we think about it, we think of an abuser and we think about a victim, and most sadly, most tragically, the true victims, in my opinion, are those children who come here to Sunday school on Sunday morning, who are in your Wesley prep throughout the week, children who watch and listen as their moms are hurt and tortured in their own homes. Our teens begin to design their own relationships on what they have learned and what they have lived. And because this monster feeds in the dark and behind closed doors, it's most often thought of as a private matter, or it's none of my business, or it's a woman's issue. But as many as 4 million women are assaulted every year, and yet few will tell a friend or a colleague or a relative or their pastor. So why is this? So let's talk about, maybe the parable of the Samaritan can kind of help with this. So you all know the story. A man was injured. He was by the side of the road. A priest walked by, a Levite walked by, and they did nothing. They saw the man by the side of the road, recognizing that this man had not merely fallen off his donkey, he was actually injured, but they kept walking by on the other side. Now the Samaritan, and from being from Samaria, he was considered an outcast in society, but he saw and he responded differently. He stopped, he attended to the person's wounds, he did what he could with what he had. He didn't ignore this person, and why did the others? It was absolutely in contradiction to their hospitality code of that day. Well, you know what? Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they thought, maybe the perpetrator was still in the vicinity. Maybe they thought if they stopped to help, somebody could hurt them as well, or perhaps they weren't prepared. Maybe they didn't know what to do, or maybe the priest, seminary, they had never talked about it in seminary or in the universities where they went. Perhaps they were so afraid, they didn't know what the resources available were, so they were so afraid that they would have to bear this burden on their own, and they're late for work, and they've got things to do, and so they walked on by the other side. But don't you think there was also probably just a little piece of those folks who walked by that blamed the victim? What was that guy doing this time of night? Is he crazy to be traveling alone in this area? Wasn't there some sort of blaming of the victim? So I wonder, I ask you all, are these not typical reactions that we have today with regards to the issue of family violence? Are we afraid? Are we afraid we'll be hurt? Are we afraid we'll get it wrong? Are we afraid that we're not prepared or that we don't know that there is a place like Genesis? Or if we know it, well, how do we refer someone there? And sometimes don't we just blame the victim? Why doesn't she just get out? What did she do to get that black eye? And then we walk on the other side of the road. So next week I'm going to go down to City Hall where our new mayor, Eric Johnson, is going to proclaim October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But you have to know that for women and children who are living in violence, every single month, every single day of every single month is awareness of the violence that's perpetrated against them. They are hyper aware and hypersensitive of moods and looks that are the precursors of that next inevitable assault. We are fortunate in Dallas, I think, to have a coordinated effort. The Dallas Police Department has an investigative unit. The DA's office has a prosecutorial unit. There are shelters like Genesis who are answering the phones 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But studies say only about 4% of the population, abused population, will ever reach out to an advocate of any kind. So what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is we all have to roll up our sleeves. We all have to be a part of the solution. We must be accountable. We must be proactive. We must be effective in protecting the most vulnerable in our congregation and in our community. If not us, then whom? If not here, then where? If we're not going to address it in our faith communities, then where are we going to address it? How will they get help? I heard a great analogy just the other day, and it was somebody talking about, if we're in a boat together, which we are, we're all in this boat together, and that there's a hole in the boat, it doesn't matter if that hole's in the other part of the boat. It doesn't matter if I'm not sitting near that hole. It doesn't matter if they don't live in my part of town or look like me or worship where I worship. We absolutely must be a part of the solution. In Matthew 13:43, you hear the parable, Jesus tells the parable of the sower of the seeds. And at the end of it, I'm going to come back to that, but at the end of it, I don't know if you remember, he says this. He says, whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. And he says it again in Matthew and Mark and even in the book of Revelation. And what this basically means is, you guys, listen up, listen to what I'm saying. You have to understand this is important. He who has ears, let them hear. So in that parable, the sower doesn't just cast seeds in an area where he thinks it's needed or that it will take hold. He doesn't just do those seeds once a Sunday in October. He didn't just leave it up to the women's ministries or the local service providers. The sowers scattered the seeds, and certainly some took hold right then. Some took hold later because those seeds were sown in the first place, and some did fall in the soil where they could grow multiple times, grew multiple times is what it says. What if today is the day that a woman who's living in violence has the ears to hear? What if she comes here today to Lovers Lane Methodist Church and she has the ears to hear about grace and an abuse-free life and hope, and to hear that there are resources that will walk beside her? What if she came and we weren't talking about it? What if it just happened to be another Sunday and we enjoyed this incredible music and this beautiful day, and no one was saying that 1 out of every 3 women will know violence on an ongoing basis? What if we didn't talk about places like Genesis? What if we didn't realize that there was somebody here that needed that help? What if I had been bent over for 18 years and no one told me I could stand up straight? What an incredible life-changing opportunity that would have been missed. We can't just talk about it once a year. We have to say it again and again and again. We have to put cards in our restroom and flyers in the hall. We have to say it from the pulpits, and we have to turn each to the other and have the courage to say, I'm afraid for you. We can stand up straight if each of us commits to what we can do, if we will commit to doing what we can with what we have. I hope you, and you do, you all support local shelters like Genesis, but let your voices and your votes be heard. Do you know how your elected officials stand on the issue of violence? Do you know how your politicians refer to women and talk about women and treat women? If you don't, you need to, but it's pretty obvious in this particular political climate. Let your vote and your voice be heard. Call your elected officials and say, why have we not reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act, our 2 senators in Texas? lives. Call them up and say, you know what? I want to know how we're getting guns out of the hands of perpetrators that walk into Sutherland Springs Baptist Church on a Sunday morning and kill 29 people. How is it those abusers still are able to have access to guns? Because if we will do that, then, ladies and gentlemen, we are committed to lighting a candle instead of just shouting at the darkness. We light a candle of education and a candle of empowerment, a candle of hope that those who are living in family violence realize that they no longer have to live that way. It is with this light that women who thought there was no hope see that there really is. Do not think, please do not think as I once did, that because of the color of my skin or where I worship or where I went to school or where I live, that any of us are immune from issues like family violence. And because of the sheer numbers of people in this room, some of you know what I'm talking about. You were that little boy that tried to get dad off mom. You were that little girl who hid under the bed when the fighting started. And for most of us, when I grew up, there were no shelters in the city of Dallas. There was no one ever talking about this private issue. There were no laws, particularly about assault in your home. We have come a long way, but we have so much farther to go. You know, it seems like the past couple of years, we have just seen storms hit our country and across the world like never before. We have watched tragedies unfold in the Gulf Coast and in the Carolinas, recently in the Bahamas, and we lost American citizens in Puerto Rico and in Houston, and we're shocked by that destruction. We're fascinated for a week or two as we watch death and injury and children being separated from parents. And certainly our initial, what Americans I think do, we're shocked at first, but then we roll up our sleeves and we send food and we send help. We send medical assistance and we send shelter. And even though these storms do happen, it seems like frequently, it's exactly the same type of destruction that happens every single day in our community, in our own homes. During these times when we watch these storms and what's unfolding on television, I'm always surprised at the similarities between those victims and the victims that I see every single day. You know, we sit back and we watch the survivors of these storms and we say, you know, the warnings of those storms were all there. They read about them, they saw these storms coming on TV, they hear about it everywhere, and then somehow they're in disbelief that it could happen to them. Maybe it happened before, maybe they had living where they live, they had weathered storms before, and they can do it again. So they board up their hearts, and they close up what they can, and they move to the emotional second floor or into the emotional attic of their lives, or maybe then onto the roof as a last resort. And then something happens, a storm turns or a levee breaks, and we hear, we sort of, again, blame that victim in saying, why didn't they just leave? Why didn't those people get out of town when they could evacuate, when they were ordered to evacuate? And I hear that same thing every single day. Why didn't that woman leave that violent relationship? She knows he's been violent. She knows what she's up against, almost like passing that person on the other side of the road and blaming her for the violence that's perpetrated against her. How do we blame a victim for what is perpetrated against her, as if leaving makes that person a gentle person? How high do the waters have to get before she does realize she and her children are going to die, and that flash flood destroys everything? She walks away, leaving behind her belongings and her family and her jobs. She may leave custody, she may leave security or trust. She may leave self-esteem, all washed away by the flood of abuse. You see, domestic violence is pervasive, it is unforgivable, and it is sometimes deadly. For these victims, there is no FEMA, there is no food drive, there is no adopt a family, and particularly it's not spoken about. So about 10 years ago, I was invited by the director of Christian Education of Lovers Lane United Methodist Church to speak to the fourth graders. And about 3 weeks out of the, and I love to do it, I love to talk to kids, I'll speak to anybody about this. About 4 weeks out, the lay leader called me and said, okay, come to room number whatever, and the service is at 9:30, and by the way, don't scare the kiddos. And I said, okay, I'll be there. And then she calls me a week later and she says, there'll be a coned off place for you. Oh, I love reserved parking places. In fact, I wish my church had valet parking. I could get there on time or at least more often. But anyway, she says, park here, tell the usher he'll reserve this space for you. And by the way, don't scare the kids. Well, about 3 or 4 of these calls, I'm slow on the uptake, but I'm thinking, are you afraid that I might frighten these children with what I have to say? And she said, well, you know, Lovers Lane is an amazing congregation, and we just don't have that in our church. We just don't have that in our church. Well, I know better, and I hope you know better. Because on that Sunday morning, I went and saw about 100 little fourth graders up in room 2 whatever, and I asked them what I love asking everyone: why do you think if a mom would stay in a violent home? And these little 10-year-olds, where it doesn't happen in their church, came up with 27 reasons. Can you come up with 27 reasons? Plus, that's not even the right question. The question is, why would he hit her? Why would he hurt her? What kind of coward does that? But these little 10-year-olds had 27 reasons. A little hand shot up from the back of the room and said, if a mom goes to Genesis, can the little girl go with her, or does she have to stay home with dad? Are we listening? Are we listening? What do the children hear? The Reverend Martin Luther King, Dr. King, once said that we in this generation must not only repent for the vitriolic words and deeds of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good. Ladies and gentlemen, the silence is killing us. The silence is what kills us with regards to domestic violence. My prayer is that Lovers Lane United Methodist Church will become a safe place, a safe horizon, a safe hope for those who so desperately need it. Because you see, when we speak and when we don't speak, we are heard. Is this going to be the congregation who looks the other way, who passes that stranger by and leaves them in the ditch because we don't know what to do? Or are we going to stand up and say loudly and clearly that we have zero tolerance for violence against women? Not in my home. And you know what? If it's not okay in my home, it shouldn't be okay with me if it's in your home. We must, as a faith community, realize he can do it, but we can do it. You know, September the 19th marked an anniversary of the death of Mary Williams Richardson, an amazing young woman. I was in the junior league with her. She lived over here on Colgate. And on that Sunday morning that she was killed, Patrick Timothy Richardson went to church at St. Michael in All Angels, and he came home that day, and he actually murdered her in front of her 3 children. Now, he stood in that congregation that day, stood up and said, "Peace be with you and also with you." And nobody said a thing to Tim. He went home and he, as I say, ended her life in front of her 3 children. We as a community were horrified as we listened to this little 8-year-old dialing 911, begging someone to help stop the bleeding. Well, see, I saw Mary about 2 weeks before she was killed. We were talking about a mutual friend with a new bruise on her arm, and I said, "Mary, we've got to do something. I'm scared for her." And she goes, "I know, I am too." I said, "Mary, if he hit her once, he'll hit her again." And she said, I know. I said, "Mary, we've got to tell her not just to get out, but how to get out and do it safely." And she says, "I know." But see, I never asked Mary. I never asked Mary, "Are you safe?" I never said, "Are you okay? I'm afraid for you." I didn't see the signs. Guys, I do this for a living, and I missed it. So we can't just throw those seeds where we think they should go. We can't just throw those seeds where we think they're going to take hold. We absolutely have to scatter those seeds and realize that if we don't, then we can pay the ultimate price. He can do this, and we can do this. Former President George Herbert Walker Bush once said that points of light are the soul of America. They are ordinary people, just ordinary people, who reach beyond themselves to the lives of those in need, bringing hope and help, opportunity, friendship, and care. It is with that care and that very hope that we must continue in our resolve to help create a community, to help create a faith community that realizes peace on earth begins at home. Thank you very much.